And now, by popular demand, we have Reuniclus. I'm gonna pronounce it the official way, even though I like the community pronunciation, whatever you want to call it. This amorphous green blob of jelly is a system of cells interlinked within cells, interlinked within cells, interlinked within one stem. Those who played the Gen 5 games will remember Elite Four Caitlin's Reuniclus, whose diverse, powerful coverage made it arguably the toughest Pokemon on her team, and was made even more annoying when it added Recover in Black and White 2. Reuniclus also had a notable appearance in the Victini and Zekrom movie, facing off against Ash's Pikachu. Today we'll be examining if Reuniclus was able to leave a dreadful, distinct impact on the competitive scene. And so, we ask, how good was Reuniclus actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Reuniclus wasn't one of the many fast nuclear attackers that the 5th generation was known for. In fact, it was pretty slow, and its special attack and power of its stab were nothing you'd blink at in a tier with Latios and Terrakion. However, in spite of this, Reuniclus still ranked as one of the most dangerous threats in OU. It could turn its low speed to its advantage with Trick Room, slicing through teams easily late game thanks to its special attack stat, which was quite high when boosted by Life Orb. And it could run the item without drawback, as it didn't take recoil due to its ability Magic Guard. Its flagship set, though, was Calm Mind and Recover. These two moves on a Pokemon with not only Magic Guard, but also Solid Bulk due to its enormous HP was absolutely amazing. Calm Mind Reuniclus single-handedly invalidated traditional stall team. It didn't care one iota for the passive damage they were all about, and it would recover off their flimsy attacks. Stall had to be extraordinarily careful against it, as it otherwise would sweep instantly and effortlessly. Common tactics were Calm Mind Roar Latias, Perish Song Celebi, and Choice Band Tyranitar. Although all these counters had potentially exploitable weaknesses that Reuniclus's teammates could handle, and usually through hazards and or pursuit. Reuniclus wasn't just a stall killer though, as it could take an assortment of brutal attacks from common offensive Pokemon, especially with its nifty fighting resistance that let it eat up Choice Band Terrakion's close combats all day. It wasn't unkillable or anything, but it was so tough to deal with because it would easily stay alive in the face of all the passive damage flying around, while its counters would easily succumb. One might think that taking advantage of Reuniclus's pursuit weakness would help in this regard, but Reuniclus wasn't necessarily scared of pursuiters. It shrugged off non-banded Tyranitar's crunch with ease, let alone pursuit on stay-in, and destroyed Scarf sets with Focus Blast. It was dicier against Chopa Berry variants, but it could simply switch out and recover a pursuit off later, while Tyranitar got inevitably worn down by hazards and other Pokemon it had to deal with, most notably Latios. Reun could pull similar tricks against Choice Band Scizor, who could recover safely even against that powerful U-turn, or it could switch out freely, as even a switching pursuit would have come close to KOing it. And either way, Scizor would get worn down by entry hazards quickly, while all it took was one recover for Reuniclus to be back in shape. Even banded Tyranitar's crunch only one-hit KO'd from full around 38% of the time, and it of course had to avoid a Focus Blast on the way in to even put itself in such a position. Plus, this was assuming that an offensive team was facing the Calm Mind variant. They had some leeway against it since they could hit it so many times as a result of its poor speed, but if they were unfortunate enough to come across Trick Room Reuniclus, they would have their speed turned against them and get ripped apart, as an offensively invested Reun easily cut through common Pokemon like Landorus, Thundurus, and Excadrill. Reun was so difficult to deal with that it was even considered for Ubers at some point. However, it didn't accrue enough votes to be banned. After Excadrill, Thundurus, and Deoxys Speed were banned, Perish Song Celebi on Sandstall continued to become more and more popular, and the prominence of Sub-Protect Gliscor, which could potentially PP stall it, didn't help matters either. Thus, Reun fell out of favor for quite a while, not being seen again until Black and White 2. And when it did come back though, boy did it come back big. When something as dangerous as Reuniclus becomes a sleeper threat, it tends to return and completely upheave the metagame as it preys on players and teams that had forgotten about it. As it happens, that's exactly what Reun did. Turned out that Reun alongside entry hazards was as effective a strategy as ever, but this time it had another layer to it: contact move punishers, which would wear down Reun's physical counters, Tyranitar, Scizor, and Jirachi even more quickly. Rocky Helmet was a great item on Skarmory, and Ferrothorn's Iron Bars were always effective, but this was taken to a whole new level by Rocky Helmet Rough Skin Garchomp. Unlike Ferro, it didn't need to rely on leftovers to stay alive, and could instead focus on incurring huge amounts of chip damage against the Pokemon spamming Crunch, U-turn, and Iron Head aimed at Reun. Dealing with Combine Reuniclus along these strategies was so immensely difficult that most teams relied on none other than their own Combine Reuniclus. They'd invest in a few extra speed EVs, Psyshock to bypass Combine boost by hitting the opposing Reuniclus defense stat, and maybe even Life Orb to ensure they were hitting hard enough. It helped that Reuniclus wasn't the only Magic Guard Psychic type around. It often teamed up with the similarly vicious Alakazam. Players couldn't just bypass the issue by rapid spinning entry hazards away either. Jellicent stood firmly in their way. Jellicent was also a great Reuniclus partner, as it would wear down and or burn Tyranitar attempting to trap it. The clamor to ban Reuniclus was louder than ever. It was an incredible suffocating presence in the metagame, and nobody liked having to win a Reuniclus war in order to not get swept by one. Instead, Excadrill was unbanned, providing the metagame with a legitimately good spinner that meant hazards were no longer completely impossible to remove, and Reuniclus's dominance dropped, as it could no longer massacre slower teams, nor it could reliably keep up with teams that stacked Black and White 2's powerful offensive tools, such as Keldeo and Technician Breloom. However, this was not to say Reuniclus ceased to be a threat. Far from it. Those teams stacking offensive threats were incredibly fearful of the Trick Room set, and Calm Mind variants continued to threaten the defensive teams that were so popular. It even saw some experimentation to becoming more threatening. Hidden Power Ice became popular to ruin Gliscor, Garchomp, and Landorus Therian that might otherwise Swords Dance and rip through it, while Thunder was explored as well. Reuniclus continued to have an excellent niche in the metagame, but that's just it. It was excellent, not broken. Certainly wasn't so broken that its only reliable counter was itself. It speaks to Reuniclus' strength and metagame shaping influence that a Pokemon had to be unbanned from Ubers to stop it from rampaging through everything else. Overall, Reuniclus was one of the most powerful, important Pokemon in the 5th generation of OU. Pokemon's resident gummy bear slots nicely into a long-standing VGC trope, the Psychic Trick Room user. When compared to the absolute paragon of that role in Cresselia, Reuniclus trades off Cresselia's massive bulk and utility for immediate power. Its ability to fire off Life Orb boosted attacks off of its massive special attack with no recoil was very, very handy. Reuniclus's other ability were also great, but saw less play. However, the nature of Reuniclus was that once you set up Trick Room, you probably wanted to stay in and take advantage of it. Psychic typing was also very useful in a generation that revolved around fighting types. Reuniclus's main opposition was Scrafty, whose dark typing and high special defense were hard for Reuniclus to deal with, even with coverage options like Hidden Power Fighting. While Reuniclus had its fair share of attractive qualities, most Trick Room players still use other setters such as Chandelure or Jellicent, who could bring some measure of power like Reuniclus, but also boasted an immunity to Fake Out. The foremost purveyor of Reuniclus's unique strengths was none other than Wolfglick, who used variations of the same team throughout his debut season to establish himself as one of the VGC's brightest stars. Wolf used the same anti-meta quartet all season, a Trick Room core of Conkeldurr, Scrafty, Cofagrigus, and Reuniclus. His basic game plan was to use Mental Herb Cofagrigus and Fake Out Scrafty to reliably set up Trick Room in the front. Then, once the opponent was out of position, Reuniclus could use its potential as an offensive setter to tear through teams alongside Conkeldurr. Business in the front, party in the back. Wolf used this core 4 alongside a rotating cast of Lumberry Emboar, Taunt Hydreigon, Terrakion, and Thundurus to great success. He won his first ever regionals in Virginia with Emboar and Hydreigon, followed it up with a win at his inaugural US Nationals with the Thundurus Terrakion version, and eventually finished up with a 6th place at Worlds with the Thundurus Emboar variant. Not bad for your first ever VGC season. However, Reuniclus's moment in the sun was brief. 2012 brought back Cresselia, who was near ubiquitous in the metagame. It was simply more reliable for Trick Room setting, and also had the benefit of being able to run many sets that weren't Trick Room, something Reuniclus could never do. However, Reun was able to find a smaller niche on Hail Room Team, an archetype popularized by players like Nugget Bridge admin Cassie and Huey Ha. While Magic Guard wasn't quite as useful in doubles due to the relative absence of strategies relying on hazards or residual damage, there was still plenty of passive damage to mitigate, especially on weather teams such as Sandstorm and Hail. Reuniclus fit better on Hail due to the weather's natural synergy with Trick Room from mons like Abomasnow and Gastrodon. Cassie was able to top cut US Nationals with her Hail Room team, which featured a Reuniclus with Trick Room, Recover, Psychic, and Energy Ball for Gastrodon. Cassie actually used Reuniclus in a very inventive way. She would lead it with Heracross, a common Trick Room partner, only to reveal that her team was only half Trick Room as her Scarf Heracross launched a huge attack along with Reuniclus. This let her use both aspects of Reuniclus effectively, its immediate offensive presence and its ability to set up Trick Room in situations where it seemed necessary. However, that was Reuniclus's only real outing in 2012, and it mostly fell to the wayside in favor of Cresselia. 2013 saw Reuniclus debut in another weather, rain. Nugget Bridge editor Dubulus used a dual Trick Room rain in the 2013 season, threatening opponents with 2 forms of speed control. While Politoed and Kingdra were able to form a solid rain core by themselves, Reuniclus teamed up with Amoonguss and Choice Band Metagross for the main mode of the team. An Amoonguss Reuniclus lead could usually set up Trick Room, and then Metagross and Specs Politoed would be able to use their power to clean up in the back. Dubulus was able to place top 8, proving that Reuniclus was a multi anti-climate vehicle of destruction. But once again, it only had one singular result to define the season. The 6th generation improved entry hazard removal in the form of a buffed defog. As a result, spikes as a whole were not popular, to say nothing of defensive teams using them, and this led Reuniclus seeing just about no usage either. A buffed knockoff and a new nuclear Pokemon like Mega Charizard Y didn't help matters much either. However, that was only in XY. In ORAS, bulky teams using spikes became incredibly popular again, as players realized how meager the defog tended to be. Now, there was a new Magic Guard Calm Mind user around though, Clefable. But this actually worked in Reuniclus' favor. It started seeing usage because with Psy Shock, it completely dominated Calm Mind Clef. It also made for an excellent pairing with Clef. Now, those bulky spikes teams had 2 resilient Magic Guard Calm Minders, making them absolutely incredible in drawn-out wars of attrition. Reun especially provided its team a leg up against opposing bulky teams that relied mostly on Calm Mind Clef. This wasn't enough to land it a true niche in OU, as Reun wasn't exactly a Pokemon you threw on just any team, but it was a legitimate tournament-worthy niche, especially as bulky teams became more and more of a force in the ORAS OU metagame. Now, as it was no longer a common sight in OU, Reuniclus fell to UU. The prospect of this 2-time Uber-nominated Pokemon in UU may have initially been cause for trepidation, but there were several factors that held it back from dominating. First, Hydreigon was incredibly popular, and the pursuit-packing Crocodile wasn't far behind. Another move Crocodile threatened Reun with was Knockoff, which was generally popular throughout the metagame, and that was a major hindrance for Reun as well. Plus, the spikes that would wear Reun's counters down weren't very popular. Plus, there were several reliable hazard removers. However, despite these common obstacles, Reun was still a solid Pokemon. Its flagship Calm Mind set was still a dangerous sweeper. It set up on popular defensive staples like Blissey, Florges, and Alomomola, and was effective at winning Calm Mind wars against Pokemon like Suicune and Cresselia thanks to Psyshock. Reun's Dark-type checks weren't rock solid either. They had to watch out for Focus Blast. Alternatively, it could trade in the huge damage for the more accurate Signal Beam, who also provided coverage that let it shred would-be counters in Celebi and Slowking. Reun had some great defensive utility as well, countering Cobalion and non-Hone Claw's Mega Aerodactyl. It did struggle against fast-paced offensive teams that stacked hugely powerful threats like Entei and Mamoswine, but once again, that's where the Trick Room variant came in. It was less popular since it had less defensive utility, stemming from its lack of leftovers and defensive EV investment, but turning offensive teams' speed against them was invaluable. Reun could sometimes struggle to fit in on teams as a result of its dark weakness that hindered it against teams like knockoff Conkeldurr, but it was still a solid Pokemon that rewarded good play and could provide quite an advantage against several popular Pokemon. Reuniclus wasn't a defining piece of ORAS UU, but it was still quite a good one. However, it didn't even end there. Reuniclus spent quite some time in RU in Gen 6. Its Calm Mind set was incredibly potent, especially with support from Toxic Spikes and Dugtrio. Dugtrio would take out annoying Pokemon to a Reun sweep, like Drapion and Encore Whimsicott, and Reun would then take over entire games. Its last move made it even more irritating. Thunderwave and Knockoff were great support moves that helped Reun's teammates, as well as its own sweep, while Acid Armor allowed Reun to set up even on Durant. Eventually, Reuniclus was suspect tested. It was so resilient and difficult to deal with to the point of being overwhelming, and the fact that it could whip out a surprise Trick Room or even Choice Spec set to blast unsuspecting Pokemon with huge surprise damage made it even worse. As such, it was banned to RUBL, although it did eventually receive enough usage to become a true UU Pokemon. 2014 saw Cresselia take a breather from VGC, and with that, Reuniclus was able to rise up once more as the Psychic Trick Room setter of choice. Its main competition was Aromatisse, who had Fairy typing, more bulk, and an incredible boon in its immunity to taunt via Aroma Veil. However, it was a scary metagame to be a Psychic type in. Tyranitar and Aegislash were everywhere, but Reuniclus also paired well with the dominant new threats of Mega Mawile and Mega Kangaskhan. However, Reuniclus also had a hidden trick. With move tutors not being accessible in 2014, it was the only Pokemon with access to both Trick Room and Helping Hand. While Aromatisse was a more reliable setter, Reuniclus brought more power to the table both by itself and its ability to aid its teammates. What's more, Aromatisse may have been reliable against Taunt, but 2014 saw more players opt to use Overcoat Reuniclus instead, making it the reliable setter against Amoonguss, which was only growing more popular. Reuniclus had scattered results throughout the season, but they were still a step up from previous years. Cameron Drizzleboy Swan stayed true to his name by using his own version version of Reuniclus in Rain to win the Virginia Seniors. He also showed some of the other options Reuniclus had under its belt by fitting it out with Overcoat, which made it hard to counter Rain's most notorious foe, Amoonguss. Cameron also packed on some additional bulk to his Reuniclus and gave it a citrus berry, a trend that continued throughout the season as players prioritized keeping it alive to potentially support teammates as well as hit with its own attacks. Michael Hutchinson actually paired Reuniclus with Aromatisse at Salem Winter Regionals to benefit his hard Trick Room Hail team, taking advantage of Abomasnow's new Mega Evolution to give Hail Room a boost and take 5th place. Ben Damien also used the good old Hail Room archetype to take 8th at the Seattle Regionals in the spring. Internationally, other players continued to give Reuniclus good results. Ash Picard won the Brisbane Regionals with yet another Hail Room team, and a player named Alexander took bronze in Auckland using the rare non-weather Reuniclus strategy. One of Reuniclus's most unique outings was credit of Terrence Dre, who paired Reuniclus with yet another weather, this time Sun, as he fit it onto his unique Victory Bell Mega Charizard Y team. Terrence used Reuniclus for a few things we've come to expect: Overcoat, Trick Room, Psyshock, Citrus Berry, and Helping Hand. However, the true coup came in 2 parts: the use of a fully physically defensive spread and skill swap. Reuniclus was able to stick around for a long time with its massive bulk, living attacks from modest Aegislash and many of the very physically oriented mons in the meta. That durability let it provide more aid or annoyance with skill swap. The 2014 metagame was defined by many mons that relied on their abilities for power, such as Mega Kangaskhan's Parental Bond and Mega Mawil's Huge Power. Removing those abilities drastically hampered those mons' effectiveness, and what's more, Reuniclus could potentially pass them onto its ready and willing teammates. Skill swap with Scrafty, and you've not only given it a huge boost, you've also shuffled Intimidate. And what was Overcoat going to do for your opponent? Well, Terrence didn't bring anything that cared about it anyways, and that's all on top of the Trick Room support, which let Charizard Y establish speed control to fire off its devastating sun-boosted heat waves. This unique Reuniclus brought Terrence to 10th place at the UK Nationals. However, there was no player more synonymous with Reuniclus in 2014 than Colin Battle Room Hayer. Just like Wolf 3 years earlier, Colin ran Reuniclus for an entire season. His reasoning was that most people weren't prepared for Trick Room, and especially not for Helping Hand Trick Room. In early meta, he was able to use his bulky Reuniclus alongside Mawile to bust through teams, and if he didn't need to set up Trick Room, Helping Hand still let Reuniclus work in the faster modes of his team, such as with Scarf High Dragon. Colin also brought Hidden Power Ice to handle Garchomp. This early commitment to Trick Room got him a top 4 placement and a win at the Madison Regionals, before he placed a disappointing 47th at Nationals. A result that led him to abandon Reuniclus for Worlds, but there he ended up placing 3rd, so good instincts, Colin. Of course, a more open format means more Cresselia to steal Reuniclus's thunder. Nevertheless, a few players still believed in the Jelly Baby's power in 2015. Among them were Gabby Snyder, who you might know now as an incredible VGC commentator. But back in 2015, she was taking names with Reuniclus in Houston, where she placed 5th. On the other side of the globe, Joshua Pethick took his own 5th place at Perth Regionals by using Reuniclus alongside a Firewater Grass core of Blaziken, Mega Blastoise, and Ferrothorn. In Europe, it was none other than Terrence Dre who brought back Reuniclus, using the same Reuniclus and Mega Charizard duo from a year before in his return to the UK Nationals. Even the innovator Terrence also had a new trick up his sleeve. His Reun was level 49 in order to underspeed opposing Amoonguss in Trick Room. Terrence placed 12th, a good follow-up to his 10th place the year before. Speaking of 12th place, in 2013, World Champ Arash Almaty used Reuniclus to make his own run to 12th place at Worlds. If you're familiar with the 2015 meta, you might know that the chalk core of Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, and Kangaskhan rose to prominence at the tail end of the season. Although the top 8 of Worlds would be dominated by this core, the players below it succeeded by preparing adequate anti-chalk teams. For Arash's part, he realized that chalk was fairly Trick Room weak aside from Amoonguss. And who's the perfect Amoonguss counter in Trick Room? That's right, Overcoat Reuniclus. Arash ran Overcoat and Life Orb, also carrying a Hidden Power Ground to handle Heatran, making a very effective anti-chalk mod that also could hold its own against other teams. He ended up leading it almost every game. 2016, however, was not the metagame for Reuniclus, whose just above average bulk made it a much less attractive option than the universally used Bronzong. Once again, Reuniclus was not a true OU Pokemon in Generation 7, but it had an invaluable niche. Passive damage was incredibly irritating, with the combination of Toxapex and Celesteela wearing most Pokemon down incredibly fast, and Reuniclus completely sat on them. Reun loved the presence of Toxapex not just because it was such a target for Reun, but because it was a great partner, as Toxic Spikes wore down a ton of common Pokemon and made Reuniclus even more dangerous. It also loved the addition of Z Crystals. The power boost was invaluable for crucial burst damage. For example, Landorus Therian or a Toxapex desperate to haze away Calm Mind boost would get mauled by a Shattered Psyche, while Tyranitar would get destroyed by an all-out pummeling. It had several options beyond these obvious choices too. Players experimented with Gigavolt Havoc, Savage Spinout, and even Bloom Doom. Unlike Life Orb, it couldn't be nullified by knockoff. Speaking of, a Z Crystal reducing the power of opposing knockoffs made Reuniclus even more difficult to KO. And speaking of making Reuniclus tougher to KO, it sometimes even ran Grassy Seed, which in grassy terrain would give it +1 defense, making it near impenetrable after a Calm Mind. Grassy terrain also provided it with invaluable passive recovery for a few turns, which let it get set up into that unkillable state more safely. As a bonus, Generation 7 lowered the critical hit chance from 6.25% to about 4.2%, making it even more difficult to break through a boosted Reuniclus with luck. Reuniclus could take this concept to an extreme with an Acid Armor set. It took a valuable moveset, but it was absolutely unbreakable with attacks, and if its Rocky helmet remained intact, it could solo Tyranitar easily. That said, it preferred Toxaspike support, so it didn't need to retain the helmet at all costs. As dangerous as these variants were, Z sets were definitely the easiest to slap on teammates, as they required the least team support, offered the best anti-knockoff resilience, and whose power boost gave them the most in-battle flexibility against a variety of teams. Reuniclus was also notable as one of the very few Pokemon that could withstand a Psychic Terrain supported Mega Metachamp, adding incredibly useful defensive utility to its team. Reuniclus excelled against the metagame's many passive damage heavy bulky teams and made for some great teams when paired with an anti-offense Pokemon like Mega Lopunny. Overall, Reuniclus was a great Pokemon in OU once again. Official tiering status be damned. Speaking of Ryun's official tiering status, power creep meant it was sent tumbling past UU this time around, landing in RU. It didn't last long there though. Its Calm Mind set overpowered and outlasted its counters incredibly easily in longer games, getting endless opportunities against staples like Chestnut, Bronzong, and Registeel, and mowing down haze attempts from Mantine with Thunder, which when boosted into Gigavolt Havoc would slam even a Scavalier. Meanwhile, the Trick Room variant mercilessly destroyed faster teams. As such, it was banned quite early into the tier's lifespan. This was where the lower tier success ended for Ryun in Gen 7 though, as it was less than good in UU. In addition to Hydreigon and Crocodile being as popular as ever, Scizor and Latias were now the tier's most dominant forces, making it immensely difficult for Reuniclus to ever accomplish anything notable. Still, Gen 7 was another good one for Ryun, being too good for RU and having an excellent niche in OU that effortlessly toppled several of the meta's most powerful Pokemon was quite impressive. While Reuniclus wasn't allowed in 2017, it wasn't really the greatest pick in 2018 either. If you did want to use Trick Room, there were many more effective setters such as Mimikyu, Porygon 2, or Cresselia, but even bringing a Psychic type was scary because Reuniclus could find itself utterly unable to touch opposing Dark types, such as Tyranitar and Incineroar. Two players gave Reuniclus good results: Mitchell Davies, who placed 6th at the Dallas Regionals with a team built by James Eakes and Andrew Nowak, and Ike Marvin Gilcher, who made top 8 at the Taiwan special event. Mitchell piloted a unique Psychenium Z Reuniclus, which made Reuniclus immune to both Spore and Taunt. Z Trick Room would go through Taunt, making the only ways of stopping Ryun being Roar or one-hit KOing it. If it didn't need to Z Trick Room, then Shattered Psyche would be a huge amount of damage for the opponent to contend with. But the main goal was getting Trick Room up no matter what for the core damage dealers of the team: Mega Camerupt, Tapu Bulu, and Stakataka. As for Ike, his Reuniclus was anti-meta in a whole new way, designed not just to beat common picks, but an entire region. Ike, who is from Germany, was doing a study abroad in Taiwan and crafted his team at the Taiwan special event to counter the hyper-offensive meta for which Taiwan was known. If you're not familiar with 2018 Chansey Timer Stall, go watch our super long video on that. But to make a long story short, Ike attempted to win by timing out his opponent's quote, "your time," end quote. A strategy which Reuniclus was an essential part of. Since Chansey's biggest weaknesses were fighting types and toxic users, Reuniclus was a great teammate due to its ability to hit fighting types and being immune to residual damage. Trick Room let other support Pokemon like Shuckle and Gothitelle do their Chansey support options, while Smeargle helped Reuniclus set up in the first place. Since Ike was focused mostly on supporting Chansey, his Reuniclus also brought Skill Swap, a great tool to have in Cycling Intimidates, taking opponents' shadow tags and weakening opposing Megas. Ike maintains that team was very strong and he planned on taking it to World, but visa issues meant he never got to see how he might have done. To close out Sun and Moon, one player was actually able to make Reuniclus work in the GS Cup format as well. Shreyas Radhakrishna realized that a Trick Room team would work really well in the early Sun series before Primals were allowed. His slow Kyogre would have a good time against most of the rest of the format, including Groudon, Xerneas, and Lunala. The challenge, of course, was getting Trick Room to set up. Enter Overcoat Reuniclus. Its Amoonguss immunity meant that when paired with an Amoonguss of its own, it was virtually guaranteed to get Trick Room up. Rage Powder would handle taunts and attacks attacks, while Reuniclus was entirely immune to Spore. Beating this required Safety Goggles, Taunt, or an immense amount of power, and Shreyas' own Amoonguss had Eject button, allowing him to freely switch into Kyogre and start attacking. This well-crafted strategy landed him 6th at the Anaheim Regionals, marking Reuniclus' only result of the 2019 season. Stakataka and Necrozma Dustmane were far more popular Trick Room setters, and by the time the Moon and Ultra series rolled around, Reuniclus had a hard time keeping up with the overwhelming power injected into the game. Generation 8 removed Z-Crystals, which Reuniclus did not care for at all, both in terms of losing the power boost and now being more afraid of knockoff. On the bright side, Pursuit was also removed. However, Reun couldn't establish a niche in OU and dropped to UU. In the metagame's initial stages, it was excellent. For the first time, it explored another ability, Regenerator. It speaks to the power of Magic Guard that Reun never considered an ability as good as Regenerator until now. When using Regenerator, Reun used a set with either Assault Vest to weather more hits, Cobra Berry to weaken knockoff, or heavy duty boots to offset Stealth Rock damage. It would dart into battle, hit an opponent with a knockoff, or set up a powerful future sight, then switch out, passively healing off whatever damage it took, and meaning it didn't have to waste turns on recover to remain healthy. Between knockoff and Focus Blast, it could easily thwart its most common check, Incineroar. It threatened much of the metagame and was generally a massive pain to switch into. Of course, Reun could still make excellent use of a Magic Guard set. It wanted the longevity of recover, but Calm Mind was generally a waste, so it opted for 3 attacks with maximum special attack and a life orb attached. It had to be a bit more careful about switching in so it wouldn't be forced to instantly heal and thus pass up on a turn to dish out damage. But if it did, it threatened the entire tier. It was an excellent Pokemon in the first stage of UU. Then the Isle of Armor came. Reuniclus was still quite a good Pokemon at first. However, over time, it struggled to keep up with the frenetic pace of the many new Pokemon that were added, such as Golurk and Flip Term Keldeo. As a result, it fell to RU and once again, it was banned from the tier, although this time it was hurried out almost instantly. Gen 8 had given Reun stored power, which was an incredibly powerful move after a few boosts that made the Calm Mind set even more difficult to deal with, and its varied coverage allowed it to beat its own checks without much effort, and thus Reun was banned from RU for the 3rd generation in a row. Finally, the Crown Tundra was released, and the Pokédex shakeup resulted in Reuniclus being released from RUBL. It wound up dropping down to NU for the first time. There, it was obnoxiously broken, in the words of the player base. It received Expanding Force, which was simply monstrously powerful in the psychic terrain that was easily provided by Indeedee Female. Stopping it with Dark types wasn't close to guaranteed, thanks to Reun's great coverage backed up by its huge special attack. In conjunction with its huge natural bulk, Magic Guard, and Recover, Reun proved to be far too much for the tier to handle, and was quickly banned. And right now, it remains to be seen how Reun will turn out in RU this time around. But no matter what happens, it's already had a great Generation 8. Reun was able to do well in the early days of VGC 2020, using the overwhelming power afforded to it by Life Orb, Magic Guard, Max Mindstorm. Give it an Indeedee Psychic Surge and Helping Hand, and you were getting KO'd if you weren't a Dark type. Alberto Lara, who placed 12th with it at the Dallas Regionals, leaned on the straightforward nature of Reuniclus' power. He says he picked it because he knew that the first tournaments would feature a lot of new or inexperienced players who didn't know how to shut down Trick Room plus Follow Me support from Indeedee, giving him a reliable and stress-free path to victory in some matches. Wolf Glick, on the other hand, picked Reuniclus with a focus on a very specific niche. Along with his team building partners Aaron Trailer and Justin Karras, Wolf built a Trick Room team that featured one incredible trick, Priority Trick Room. See, when a Pokemon uses Trick Room in Dynamax, it turns into Max Guard, just like all other non-attacking moves. But for all other purposes, it's still Trick Room. Enter Copycat Liepard. With Prankster, Copycat becomes Priority, then copies the Trick Room Max Guard that Reuniclus has just used. Wolf and Co were looking for an offensive Trick Room setter that could abuse the interaction, and Reuniclus fit perfectly. Hatterene was early Sword and Shield's other premier offensive Trick Room setter, but Reun was chosen for a few reasons. Electric coverage for the most common mon in the metagame, Togekiss, was really nice, and also made Reun able to play around any sleep-based strategies with electric terrain. Other benefits included fighting coverage via Focus Blast and a lack of a Steel-type weakness. Reuniclus was also supported by the reliable Trick Room setters of Mimikyu and Dusclops, while its own Togekiss provided Follow Me support and weakness policy Rhyperior could bring more power. Wolf took this team all the way to a silver medal at Collinsville before falling to Andrew Ding in a match that had some wonky timer interactions due to a rules hiccup. Either way, he demonstrated Reuniclus' potential past a shadow of a doubt. Then the other VGC series got released and players shifted to other strategies, especially as the Copycat Trick Room interaction was more familiar. And that's it. So how good was Reuniclus actually? Well, nobody could deny that it has been thoroughly excellent throughout its existence. It has repeatedly shown the sheer power of from Magic Guard, one of the best abilities in the game, if not the best. In fact, it's so good that Ryuen has all but completely ignored another one of its abilities, Regenerator, which also ranks among one of the best abilities, but that just speaks to the power of being able to ignore passive damage. Ryuen shaped Gen 5 to the point where they had to unban an Uber just to try and contain it in conjunction with entry hazards. Then it came back and destroyed passive damage centric teams in Gen 6 and 7 OU as well. It also had quite a storied lower tier career. It's been banned from RU 3 times, just got banned from NU, and who knows, it wouldn't be surprising to see it get banned from RU twice in Gen 8. And of course in VGC, it's been a premier Trick Room setter that can also ignore Amoonguss if it chooses to run Overcoat, although it does have some competition with other Trick Room setters. But with that being said, it's had a pretty good performance over the course of its VGC years. Overall, Reuniclus has been tremendous, even though I despise how to pronounce it properly. I like saying Reuniclus, it's much easier to say. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Reuniclus? How would you improve it? It's already got really good abilities, so maybe it needs something else. Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.